Nobody truly knew what happened to Pastor David's only son. They only saw the funeral. They saw the tears. They saw the church draped in black clothes. And they watched a strong man of God, one they had admired for years, stand beside a coffin that held everything he loved, speechless, shattered, incomplete. But the truth didn't die with the boy. It was waiting, quietly, patiently, watching the world pretend everything was normal, and one day it would come out. But before that day, there was a man named Pastor David, a man who loved God, yes, but loved something else just a little bit more. Fame, recognition, applause, validation. Those were the things his prayers had slowly started sounding like. Pastor David wasn't always like this. He had started ministry with fire in his bones and humility in his heart. He preached in school halls, under tents, in borrowed auditoriums, and even in the dusty open field of his small town. Those early days carried a sincerity that made people weep when he preached. He spent nights praying, not for miracles or crowd, but simply because he wanted to please God. Over the years, things changed. The church grew, the crowd increased. A massive cathedral rose from the ground like a testament of how God had been faithful. Members called him Papa, Daddy in the Lord, my spiritual covering. People traveled from neighboring towns just to sit under his ministration. Testimonies filled the altar every Sunday. The ministry, from the outside, looked like a storybook success. But one thing was missing. He wasn't popular enough. While his ministry grew locally, it didn't blow. He wasn't the pastor people quoted online. He wasn't the one trending on TikTok. He wasn't the pastor who got invited to America, Canada, UK, Dubai, Australia. He didn't have thousands of comments under his post saying, "Daddy, your grace is too much. My father, my father. Sir, you are a voice to this generation." He had the church, he had money, he had respect, but he didn't have global fame, and that quietly began to eat him from the inside. It started like a harmless longing, sitting in his office after service, scrolling through social media, watching clips of other pastors standing before massive congregations in foreign countries, wearing elegant suits, English polished, confidence blazing like fire. He would watch his friends, men he started ministry before, sit beside presidents, preach at global conferences, get honorary doctorates, and command attention everywhere. Sometimes he would smile and clap in admiration. Other times, his chest would tighten a little. His wife, Grace, noticed it first. "David?" she would say softly whenever she caught him staring at the screen too long. "You are thinking again." He would force a smile. No, I'm fine." But he wasn't. Inside, a dangerous sentence had begun to form. Why them and not me? One evening, after a long Sunday, he sat in his office while rain battered the roof of his church. The sermon was over. The crowd had gone home. Only silence remained. He didn't feel fulfilled. He felt small, insignificant, hidden. That night, he finally admitted it out loud. "God, why am I not known? Why hasn't the world heard my voice? Haven't I served you faithfully enough?" He spoke like a son, but the bitterness in his tone sounded more like accusation. He didn't know that prayers driven by envy rarely lead to God. Something else listens, something that offers quick answers but demands something in return. When patience failed him, he decided to speak with someone he respected deeply, his spiritual father, Bishop Collins. Bishop Collins had been in ministry for decades. He wasn't just influential, he was a legend among ministers. The man people quoted, the man whose sermons trended, the man who traveled everywhere, a global figure, the kind of man David desperately wanted to become. They met in a quiet lounge in Lagos, one designed for elite clergy gatherings. The room smelled of expensive leather and old wisdom. The walls carried portraits of bishops and overseers. Everything there whispered influence. Bishop Collins sat across from him, calm, graceful, smiling like a satisfied king. "So, David," he said gently, "how is work?" David smiled politely. "The work is fine, sir. God has been faithful." "Good." The bishop nodded. "Why do you look troubled?" David swallowed hard, searching for courage. "Sir, I want what you have," he whispered. "I want the world to hear my voice. I want doors to open. I want nations to call me. I want influence. I want my name to matter globally. I've prayed, I've fasted, I've done everything. Nothing is changing." He expected the bishop to laugh it off. Instead, Bishop Collins leaned back slowly and studied him. Then he smiled. Bishop Collins said softly, "God is a God of time and seasons. Keep working. When your time comes, nothing will stop it. Don't rush grace. Don't force destiny." It sounded perfect, biblical, reassuring. It also sounded dismissive. Pastor David forced gratitude. He bowed, thanked him, and left. But as he drove home that night through the quiet city streets, something inside him rebelled against those words. Wait for God. How long again? How many more years? How many more people need to overtake me? He didn't want to wait anymore. He wanted shortcuts. He wanted doors forced open. He wanted influence now. And when a man stops trusting God's timing, something else always finds him. Something patient, something watching, something ready. That was when Pastor Collins, his close friend, not to be confused with Bishop Collins, entered the story fully. Pastor Collins wasn't as big as Bishop Collins, but he was influential enough. He had fame, his name was everywhere. Invitations poured in from different countries. He was young, stylish, confident, and strangely secretive. David had always admired him too. So one day, after wrestling with frustration for weeks, Pastor David drove straight to Collins' house unannounced. Collins welcomed him warmly, offered him food, joked, laughed. But David wasn't there for laughter. "I need help," David said plainly. Collins raised a brow. "Ministry problem?" David hesitated, then spoke from the rawest part of his soul. "I want what you have. I want what Bishop has. I am tired of being hidden. I can't keep watching others overshadow me. Collins, I need my ministry to explode. I want global relevance." He expected Collins to quote scripture. He didn't. He simply studied him quietly, then nodded slowly. "I've been waiting for this day," he said calmly. David blinked. "What?" Collins smiled faintly. "You think influence just falls like manna? You think doors open by accident? You think global relevance is charity from heaven?" He leaned closer. "Nothing big comes cheap, my friend." Those words sent a cold shiver down David's spine. He didn't fully understand them, but he had enough to be afraid. "What do you mean?" David whispered. Collins didn't answer immediately. He simply patted David's shoulder. "Relax, there is a way. I'll take you somewhere. You'll meet someone. Just trust me." Somewhere in David's spirit, alarm screamed, but desperation pressed his heart flat. He nodded. They fixed a date, and that single decision would change everything about his life, his ministry, his family, and eventually his sanity. The place wasn't a shrine, it wasn't a forest, it wasn't some stereotypical dark ritual ground. That would have been too obvious. Instead, they drove into a quiet, beautifully built estate. They parked in front of a massive mansion. Inside, the scent of foreign perfume filled the air. Luxurious rugs kissed the floor. A large golden cross hung on the wall. Expensive Bibles decorated the shelves. If someone had walked in by mistake, they would have assumed it was a bishop's retreat house, which technically it was, just not the kind of bishop most people imagined. He was introduced as Bishop Lucas, elegant, warm, charismatic, charming, the kind of man whose presence filled a room effortlessly. Pastor David, Lucas greeted warmly, hugging him like an old friend. I have heard a lot about you. You are a great man of God. God has big plans for you. Those words pierced deeply. They sounded like prophecy. They felt like validation. They tasted like hope. Lucas treated him like royalty. He laughed with him, spoke softly, encouraged him, reassured him that greatness was within reach. Then food came, meat, red wine, specially prepared. David's fasting instinct kicked in immediately. "Sir, I am fasting," he said respectfully. Lucas's gentle expression dropped for a split second. Then he smiled again. But the smile was tighter. "My dear, in this house, you don't reject hospitality. To reject what we serve is to reject what we give. Eat, drink." David's heart pounded. Everything inside screamed no, but his ambition whispered, "Do it." After a long hesitation, he obeyed. He ate, he drank, and something silently shifted in the spirit realm. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet agreement sealed. That night he dreamt. He found himself standing in a massive hall with strange lighting. Powerful men stood in a circle, men he recognized, faces he knew, faces he respected, men the world called anointed, men the nation bowed to. His mentor, his friend Collins, Bishop Lucas, many others, all standing together like a brotherhood. He woke drenched in sweat. "What is this?" he whispered. The next night, the same dream returned, only clearer, more real. This time, they smiled at him. This time, they welcomed him. He woke trembling. That was the day he called Pastor Collins, and that was the day Pastor Collins finally said it plainly. "Congratulations, you are now one of us." David froze. One of who? Pastor Collins sighed as if tired of pretending. A brotherhood, a council, a system that controls what people see and applaud. "You said you wanted fame. Welcome to the road." Silence swallowed David. His chest tightened. "You never told me this," he whispered, voice breaking. Collins chuckled. "If I told you, would you have come?" Anger hit David like a slap. "You tricked me. I don't want this. I want out." Pastor Collins simply leaned back, amused. "There is no out. You already ate the covenant. You already drank the seal. You crossed the line yourself." David shook. Fear swallowed pride. Panic replaced ambition. That night, he cried, he prayed, he tried to undo it. But some choices, once opened, refused to close easily. His life would never be the same again. And unfortunately, the price, it hadn't even been mentioned yet. It was only the beginning. For the first time since he started ministry, Pastor David became afraid to sleep. Night was no longer rest. Night was court. Night was where he stood face to face with a reality he wanted to deny but could no longer run from. Each dream carried the same message, the same unspoken acceptance, the same cold welcome into something he didn't consciously sign up for but had already entered. And every morning, he woke up with a weight in his chest, but nothing changed. He still dreamt, he still heard voices, he still felt washed, and worst of all, he still felt bound. That was when the anger began to fade and fear rearranged itself into something darker, hopelessness. Pastor Collins came to visit 3 days later, wearing that same relaxed confidence, like a man who lived in a world guaranteed results and controlled destinies. David didn't let him sit before he burst out. "Cancel this thing, please. Break whatever you people did. I don't want this. I don't want anything again. Let me just serve God the way I have been doing." Collins laughed. He actually laughed. like someone who had just heard the funniest joke all week. "My dear friend," he said, shaking his head, "you don't walk into a sealed covenant and talk about canceling. This is not plastic you tear and throw away. You made the choice. The system simply accepted." He said it the way someone talks about a bank transaction. Cold, normal, transactional. David's temper snapped. "You deceived me. You used my desperation against me. You made me eat something I didn't understand. You trapped me." Collins' smile disappeared, and for the first time, David saw the man beneath the sweet friend facade. The smile faded, the eyes hardened, the voice dropped. "Stop talking like a child." Collins replied quietly. "Nobody forced greed into you. Nobody planted that jealousy in your chest. Nobody made you want to become a global voice overnight. You came willingly. You knocked. The door opened. Now, you are inside." He stood slowly and leaned close. "And one more thing," he added. "Don't ever talk about backing out in this matter. It does not exist. The earlier you settle that in your spirit, the safer you will be." Safe. The word didn't sound like protection. It sounded like a threat. Pastor Collins smiled again like nothing happened and patted his back. "You'll be fine. In 21 days, physical initiation will be completed. After that, everything will fall into place. Worldwide visibility, open doors, invitation from nations. Trust me, you will thank me later." Then he left, just like that, leaving David sitting in his own office, feeling like a stranger in his own calling. The 21 days that followed were the slowest days of his life. He preached, he smiled, he counseled, he led prayers, but inside, he was dissolving. Every sermon sounded heavy in his own ears. Every praise the Lord he shouted felt like someone else's voice. He stood on the altar and felt something washed him from the shadows of the church. He wasn't even sure if he was praying or just performing prayer. His wife noticed. Grace always noticed. She wasn't just his wife. She had walked with him through every stage of ministry, from the days of preaching under rain to the days of auditorium dedications. She knew his spirit rhythm. She recognized the sound of a burdened man, and this was beyond burden. He started losing focus mid-conversation. He stared into space too often. He didn't want to talk about anything deeply spiritual. He avoided intimacy. Something was eating him. One night, she held his hands and asked softly, "David, what's going on with you?" His throat tightened. He wanted to tell her everything, but fear wrapped his voice. Fear of losing her. Fear of sounding mad. Fear of saying something he couldn't pull back. So, he smiled weakly. "I'm just tired." She looked at him for a while, trying to read a man she once understood completely, and realized she could no longer read him fully. That hurt her deeply, but she let him be. The 21 day came. He didn't go. They came for him. A call, then a driver, then a quiet ride to a location he didn't recognize. No rain, no thunder, no eerie background noise, just the unsettling normalcy of everything. He expected something dramatic, but darkness doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just organizes. He was taken into a magnificent underground hall, designed like a blend between a cathedral and a private council chamber. It smelled expensive. Every detail screamed elite power. Then he saw them, faces, familiar ones. Bishop Lucas, Pastor Collins, Bishop Collins, the one he grew up admiring. Pastors whose books he read, men whose voices filled Christian television, spiritual giants that families knelt before their screens to listen to. They weren't rumors this time. They weren't dreams, illusions. They were here, present, comfortable, and that broke something inside him. He expected to see monsters. Instead, he saw respected men. Men people trusted. Men people sold into. Men people called Papa, Daddy. They welcomed him, not as a stranger, not as a newcomer, as a recruit. "Welcome," Bishop Lucas smiled, "to the circle of influence, the table of relevance. the brotherhood of those who rule quietly while the world celebrates loudly. There was no chanting, no slaughtered animals, nothing dramatic, just quiet agreement, symbolic pledges, sealed oath, decisions whispered like normal speeches. That was the scariest part. Evil doesn't always look evil. Sometimes it is polished, educated, soft-spoken, elegant. He didn't want to say yes, but silence could mean refusal. And refusal here was not something he wanted to test. So, he followed, he repeated, he pledged, and something locked fully. This time, he didn't feel fear. He felt strange peace. Not God's peace, a dangerous counterfeit. A calmness that came from acceptance. He had crossed. There was no need fighting anymore. When he was leaving, his mentor, the same Bishop Collins who once told him to wait for God's time, walked up to him, placed a hand on his shoulder, and smiled gently. "I told you God is a God of time," he whispered, voice low and deliberate. "I just didn't tell you who controls the times men see." For now, results were about to begin. It started subtly. An international preacher cancelled an event, and a desperate organizer desperately needed a replacement. Someone mentioned his name. They took a chance. That meeting changed his life. He preached like he always did, but this time, something else escorted his words. Crowds wept, ministers trembled, clips went viral, invitations multiplied. Suddenly, the same man who once waited hopelessly for opportunities found himself struggling to keep up with bookings. London, Canada, Dubai, USA, South Africa, Europe. Different countries, different congregations, same overwhelming reception. People cried when he stepped on stage. They screamed his name. They called him God's battle axe. They called him a mighty general raised for the nations. And instead of feeling afraid, he felt alive. For the first time, he saw himself on television channels he once respected. He saw his clips trend under hashtags. He saw airport pictures go viral. He saw members bursting with pride. "That's my pastor. My father is global now. We belong to a great ministry. God is working." His church exploded. New members flooded in weekly. Tithe multiplied. Honorariums poured like rain. International partners appeared from nowhere. And that empty hole in his heart, fame poured into it, at least for a while. Because unfortunately, fame doesn't come to stay as a blessing. It comes to rent space. And every rent has an expiry date. Grace watched everything. Her husband was now the pastor she once admired from afar. The world celebrated him. He became the kind of man journalists begged to interview. Members adored him. Church leaders honored him. Doors opened every week. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something shifted the day everything changed. He still prayed. He still preached. He still loved God outwardly. But something inside him had changed. He hugged differently. He laughed differently. He stared differently. Success had arrived, but peace didn't come with it. And though he now slept, whenever he turned in his sleep, he still frowned, as if somewhere in his spirit, a part of him never rested. 2 years passed, 2 loud, glorious, overwhelming years. To the world, he was the man whose star finally found its sky. To his church, he was the proof that God lived in grand style. To his fellow ministers, he had officially joined the League of Global Voices. To his son, he was still just daddy. Chris adored his father. He always had. He waited at the door when he traveled. He counted days till he returned. Chris was his joy, his pride, his laughter when ministry became too heavy. His reminder that life was still tender and human. His word. He didn't know that same word would become the bargaining chip. The price nobody mentioned in the beginning. The price that hides behind applause. Waiting, watching, counting until the right time. And finally, the time came. not with dramatic announcement, just a calm invitation to a meeting he couldn't refuse, a table, a conversation, a requirement, not suggested, not negotiated, declared, cold, direct, unavoidable. He sat still, breath stuck, pulse racing, mind screaming, because what they asked for wasn't money, wasn't obedience, wasn't loyalty. It was something deeper, something human, something irreplaceable, something God Himself commands men to protect, something no father should ever have to weigh as decision. His only son, Chris. His laughter, his innocence, his blood, his legacy, his heart. The child he prayed for, the child he cherished. They wanted Chris. And no matter how loud his soul screamed, he had already signed the part nobody reads before agreeing, the part labeled consequence. The day they told him what the brotherhood required, Pastor David stopped breathing for a few seconds. Not physically, his chest still moved, but something inside him froze like someone pressed pause on his soul. They sat around that polished table again, the same men he once admired, the same mentor he once celebrated. Calm faces, peaceful smiles, gentle tones, no horns, no flames, no dramatic darkness, just men. Men who had already paid, men who had already buried something precious, men who now spoke about sacrifice the same way people talk about routine, like it was normal, like it was expected, like it was just part of the journey. Every seat at the top has a price. Bishop Lucas said softly, like a man explaining basic truth. Nothing significant stands without something holding it. Your results have been enjoyed freely for 2 years. Now, it's time to balance what has been given. He shook his head slowly as tears filled his eyes. No, no, no. Anything else, I will give money, I will give land, I will give church property. I will surrender my travel invitations. I will leave the brotherhood. I will disappear. Just leave my son out of this. The room didn't shift. No pity, no surprise, no debate. Just cold calm. You don't bargain, one of the older pastors said quietly. You don't trade, you comply. What if I don't? Pastor David asked with a trembling voice. Then came the warning. If you refuse, you don't just lose him. They take him, they take you, and others follow. Refusal is never neutral. It invites disaster. Silence drowned the room. He burst into tears, actual tears, begging grown men who once preached compassion, love, peace. They watched him cry like they'd seen this scene many times before, like they expected it. Collins placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Calm down, he whispered. All of us face this. I used my wife. Someone else used a sibling. It hurts, but afterward, life continues. You will heal, just obey. He swallowed painfully. Heal. How do you heal? How do you look at your wife afterward? How do you live with your own reflection? How do you hold a microphone and say, God is good? Nothing about that sentence made sense. He left the meeting shattered. He walked into his room, but he didn't remember walking. He locked himself in his bathroom and cried like a man who had discovered there were worse pains than death, because death ends something. Grace noticed the change immediately. He didn't speak, he didn't eat, he sat still for too long. Sometimes he stared at their son like a man trying to memorize a face permanently. Sometimes he would hold Chris too tightly. Sometimes he avoided him entirely. He wanted to fight. He wanted to run. He wanted to confront them again. He wanted to pray. He did pray, desperately. But there was this haunting reality. He wasn't praying from innocence. He was praying after willingly stepping where he should never have gone. He had eaten something he shouldn't have touched. He had agreed to something his spirit warned against. He had opened a door that didn't close with casual repentance. He lay flat on the floor begging for reversal, but the clock kept ticking, and time is one thing nobody stops. It began quietly. A fever, harmless, ordinary, nothing alarming at first. They gave him medication, they prayed, they kept watching. Day 1 passed, day 2, day 3. Something was wrong. The fever wasn't acting ordinary. Doctors couldn't explain. Tests came back clear. Machines couldn't pick anything. Medically, nothing was wrong. Physically, everything was wrong. Chris grew weaker, breathing heavier, eyes tired, smile fading. Grace panicked. A mother knows when illness is normal, and when something bigger is standing behind it. She prayed day and night. She cried in hospital corridors. She begged doctors. She begged anyone who looked like they could help. Pastor David, he broke on the inside. He knew. He recognized the timing. He recognized the calm certainty in the brotherhood members who occasionally checked on him and simply asked, "How is the boy?" Not with concern, but with expectation. They didn't need updates. They already knew. 7 days. That's how long it took. 7 long days of hospital beds, whispers, injections, confusion, hope, fear, prayer, panic, and helplessness. On the 7th day, in the quiet stillness of evening, doctors tried, nurses rushed, but some battles aren't fought in hospitals, and this one wasn't. They pronounced him gone. There are cries human voices can properly describe, sounds that sound human. Grace pronounced that kind. She screamed with a grief that shook walls. She held her son like she could command life to come back. She begged God. She begged the doctors. She begged the child. But silence answered. And silence is sometimes the loudest thing in the world. Pastor David didn't cry immediately. He stood frozen, like someone unplugged him from reality. A nurse tapped him, "Sir." He didn't hear. Someone shook him gently, "Sir." He still didn't respond. He was hearing something else, not voices in the room, voices in his soul. This was the price. This was the agreement. This is the cost of what you wanted. He finally sank to the floor slowly, and then he broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just deeply. Quiet tears from a man who now fully understood that fame that cost your soul doesn't come cheap. The church mourned widely. Social media flooded with tributes. Members gathered crying loudly outside the hospital. People prayed. People asked questions. How? A pastor's child? Why? How could this happen? Nobody had answers. Doctors simply said, "We cannot explain what happened." They buried him, slowly, painfully, heavily. But grief doesn't end at burial. Sometimes that's where it really begins. 7 days after burial, something shifted. Night returned as a courtroom again. Not with brotherhood dreams this time. Something else. Voices, accusing, echoing. Not voices from men, voices from guilt. Then, the voice of a boy. Not screaming, not violent, just full of pain. "Daddy, why?" Every night. "Daddy, why?" Grace woke up to screams. Not the child's, her husband's scream. He would jolt awake, sweating, shaking, breathless, clutching his chest like something invisible was choking him. She sat beside him crying and shouting, "David, talk to me. What is wrong with you?" He couldn't explain. He couldn't lie anymore. He couldn't pretend. He was no longer fighting the brotherhood. He was fighting himself. The guilt wasn't spiritual alone. It was human. A father who had indirectly allowed his son to become a transaction. His mind wouldn't carry it anymore. He started talking to himself. He avoided people. He avoided mirrors. He avoided God. Church members noticed. Assistants noticed. The world noticed. He started shrinking without physically shrinking. He looked older. He looked weaker. He looked empty. And one day, he couldn't hold it anymore. The confession came like a dam finally bursting. He woke up screaming louder than ever, trying to breathe, trying to speak. Grace ran to him. He grabbed her, crying uncontrollably. "I did it. I did it. I allowed it. I joined something. I agreed. I traded him." The words spewed, broken, desperate, raw. Grace collapsed. Her words shattered in one sentence. The room felt like it tilted, reality fractured. She couldn't cry immediately. Her brain froze first. Then emotion caught up. She wailed, not just for her child anymore, for betrayal, for deception, for trust broken, for the man she thought she knew, who now sounded like a stranger. Before she could even process fully, something else happened. Mid-confession, his voice stopped. Not faded gradually. It stopped, like someone pressed mute. He held his throat, eyes wide in fear, trying to force sound out. Nothing. He coughed. He tried again. Silence. He signaled. He panicked. He clawed at the air like someone drowning. Grace screamed for help. Doctors came. Nothing. His voice was gone. Not medically explainable. Not treatable. Some people said grief caused it. Some said shock. Some said trauma. Those who knew spiritual things suspected more. Those in the brotherhood, they simply knew. He attempted to expose a system that doesn't tolerate exposure. Silence was the easiest punishment. A locked throat speaks louder than confession ever could. News eventually leaked. Church members whispered. Leaders panicked. Rumors spread. Some members refused to believe it. No, Daddy is a holy man. It's a lie from the pit of hell. They are attacking our pastor. Others struggled quietly with truth. Some left the church silently. Some stayed out of fear. Some stayed out of denial. Social media dragged him. Journalists speculated. Other pastors pretended not to know anything, but preached mysterious sermons, indirectly shading the situation. His wife? She was torn between love, betrayal, compassion, anger, disgust, and pity. She couldn't leave immediately. She couldn't stay peacefully either. She sat beside a husband who could no longer preach, no longer travel, no longer charm crowds. A man who now sat quietly staring into space, haunted not by demons, but by the weight of his own choices. The church slowly declined. Members left, partnerships stopped, invitations died, respect evaporated. People only remembered him now for scandal, for whispers, for tragedy. He had once begged for fame. Now he had it, but not the kind he wanted. He became a silent man, caged inside his own body, alone with guilt, unable to defend himself, unable to explain. A fallen giant, not falling because God failed him, falling because he refused to wait, falling because ambition shouted louder than conscience, falling because shortcuts always return with receipts. Nobody truly knew what happened to Pastor David's son, at least not publicly. Doctors didn't know, church didn't know, the world didn't know. They just saw a boy die mysteriously, a pastor lose his voice, a ministry crumble, a family break, a once celebrated man disappear into silence. But heaven knew, hell knew, he knew, and eventually his wife knew, the brotherhood knew, and she would carry that knowledge for the rest of her life. Some stories don't end with grand redemption acts. Some don't end with miracles. Some don't end with triumphant testimonies. Some end quietly with consequences and silent lessons. Lessons written in tears. Lessons whispered in caution. Lessons carved into memory. Not every open door comes from God. Not every opportunity is divine. Not every shiny platform is holy. And sometimes, the loudest tragedies begin with one small whisper inside a man's heart. Why them and not me? I hope you enjoyed this story. Give it a like. Share it with your friends, your family, your loved ones. I'll see you in the next. Goodbye.